This meeting is extremely important, not just for us personally, but for the entire planet, because it represents media with a combined audience of literally several billion people. I want to ask the first question, perhaps a generalizing one. The world is changing at such a rapid pace that we sometimes don't even have time to keep track of how different it has become. What are the main features of these changes, and what opportunities do they present for BRICS?
The most important feature is the formation of new development centers. This is the most important sign. And this development, according to experts, whom I trust very much and whose opinion I listen to, will objectively take place primarily in the BRICS member countries. This is first of all the so-called Global South. This is Southeast Asia. This is Africa. Growth, positive growth, will be in such powerful countries as China and India. Positive growth will be in Russia, Saudi Arabia. But the countries of Southeast Asia and Africa will demonstrate outperforming growth for several reasons. The first reason is the level of development of those countries in which positive dynamics are expected, but are still restrained. First of all, this is because these countries have already reached a certain level of development. Secondly, in those countries that I said that will have faster growth, they are not urbanized enough, and they have a high rate of population growth. And these two factors will undoubtedly play a key role in the formation of new centers of economic growth, followed by the development of political influence. As for such BRICS members as China, India, Brazil, South Africa, of course, the growth of their economic potential will be accompanied by the growth of their influence in the world. This is an absolutely obvious thing. The BRICS, as my colleagues, partners and friends have said many times, is 45% of the world's population, 33% of the landmass. This is natural, in fact. There is nothing wrong with it. The world is constantly changing, and there are always leaders emerging. So we should take it calmly as a given, and based on this, build relations among ourselves. What distinguishes BRICS from so many other international organizations? BRICS was never built against anyone. It was said very well by the Prime Minister of India. He said recently that BRICS is not anti-Western, it is just not Western. That's very important, that makes a lot of sense. So BRICS is not opposed to anyone. It is simply an association of states that work together on the basis of common values, a common vision of development, and most importantly, taking into account each other's interests. This is the basis on which we will work in Kazan.
Mr. President, you have mentioned numerous times that the world order should be reorganized. That is no simple task. We see that China and the US are also involved in the global changes. Does Russia feel like a junior partner in the China-US standoff?
We have unique relations with China, it is true. They are very trusting, and the volume of trade and economic relations is growing rapidly. According to our statistics, the trade turnover is somewhere between $226 and $228 billion. And according to Chinese statistics, the turnover is already about $240 billion between our countries. So this speaks for itself. I have already said many times, and I want to emphasize again that Russian-Chinese interaction in the international arena is undoubtedly one of the key factors of stability in the world, strategic stability. And there is no senior or junior here. Do you understand what I'm saying? We do not interfere, you see, if any difficulties arise and something depends on us. We are ready to offer our services in resolving these problems if they arise. And if the participants of the relevant process are interested in our participation. The largest economy in the world today, not per capita, but in purchasing power parity, is China. That's still a statistic. In second place is the United States. Yes, per capita, of course. It's much bigger in the States. Well, look at the population in China, over 1 billion, and how many in the United States. But the size of the economy is bigger. The United States is in second place. India is in third place, by the way. The Russian Federation is in fourth place. We're a little bit ahead of Japan. China is our #1 trade and economic partner. But Russia's share is growing, and now Russia's share is 4th in China's trade turnover. You see, this matters to everyone. We measure every step very carefully. Chinese partners are happy to buy Russian energy resources. This is Russia's most reliable source. We have a common border, not subject to any fluctuations in terms of world politics. There is no need to move anything across borders, across the sea, across the ocean. The border is common. And Russia's energy resources are simply limitless. And if you look at the relationship between China and the United States, here, I think the states need to think. They have spoiled relations with Russia. They impose constant sanctions, and this has a negative impact on them. In the end, it affects them, including the dollar. The whole world thought about whether it is worth using the dollar. If the United States, for political reasons, restricts the use of the dollar as a universal international unit of account. Everyone has thought about it, and the use of the dollar is slowly but slightly decreasing, both in settlements and in reserves. Even traditional allies of the United States are reducing their dollar reserves. What's happening to China? Well, it's one sanction after another. And it is not related to politics. It is related to the growth of the Chinese economy and the attempt to slow down this growth with the help of various politically motivated sanctions. I want to say this. The United States is 15 years too late. They will not be able to halt China's development. It cannot be done. Just as it is impossible to say to the sun, don't get up, it will rise anyway. But there are objective processes of economic development. They are related to a million factors. And this attempt to hold back China's development, it has a negative impact on the United States economy. They are making the production of a number of their own goods low competitive. And if they continue along this path, they will make them uncompetitive in a particular sector of the economy. This is how cooperation has developed over the previous decades between the Chinese economy and the United States. It is interconnected. Everyone understands this, but the actions that we are seeing today on the part of the United States, I think they are counterproductive. But this is also related to security policy. Why are they creating provocations with Taiwan? And now they're trying to drag NATO and Europe into Asia. Nobody is asking the Europeans if they want to wade in there and spoil relations. But they're being dragged there like puppies.
Can we expect any pressure to reach a ceasefire in the Middle East crisis, given that all BRICS members support a two-state solution to the Palestinian issue?
Our position here is very well known. We have always proceeded from the fact that the Security Council resolution, the Security Council decision on the establishment of two states, Israel and the Palestinian state, must be implemented. That is the root of all problems. And I am sure that we will have to talk about it at the BRICS summit. By the way, I have invited the President of Palestine to participate in our events. We will have an opportunity to hear him, to listen to his assessments. I have had a lot of conversations on this topic with the Israeli leadership, with the leadership of Saudi Arabia, and with the Palestinian leadership. It is impossible, in my opinion, I told our partners in Israel, it is impossible, I think, to solve the Palestinian problem solely on the basis of economic issues. I know that the Israeli leadership is of the opinion that it is enough to satisfy some fundamental interests of the Palestinians living in these territories, and the issue will be closed. It seems to me that in addition to purely material issues, there are also issues related to the spiritual sphere, related to history, related to the aspirations of this or that people living in certain territories. Here the issue is much deeper and more complicated. Firstly, we need to work in this area. Secondly, of course, we need to work within such a broad consensus. I don't want to, blame the United States for everything here, but it was wrong of them to destroy the format of the Middle East Quartet. Honestly, I don't want to keep pointing at them and saying that they are to blame for all the troubles. It is probably not true, of course, but they should have destroyed the format of the Middle East Quartet for nothing. It worked. it was easier to harmonize all the positions, but they took over, monopolized this work, took all the responsibility. Well, it didn't work out in the end. They failed with it. I think we should go back to the previous format. Maybe even expand this foursome to talk about how to rebuild these territories, how to bring back the people who left these territories. The Palestinians will not leave. It's their land. You have to understand that. That's the first thing. And secondly, the more humanitarian problems there are, the more people will be willing to defend their interests. By the way, many people in Israel understand this. And many people in Israel also share this viewpoint, which I am now presenting to you.
How can you and Russia hosting BRICS accelerate the mechanisms for BRICS to play a far more important role, one, economically, two, in payment systems, and three, which I think is important, in politically as well? Thank you, Mr. President.
As your Egyptian colleague said, we claim and aspire to reorder the world order. We are not really striving. It happens naturally. We are simply saying that this is an inevitable process, and we must respond accordingly. After all, these new centers of power that are emerging, they are not because the Western countries brought the Ukrainian crisis to the point where everything led to the state it is in. I'll just remind you once again, in 2014, the Western countries led by the US organized, or if not organized, supported the coup d'etat. That's where the whole crisis started. And over the years, they started to push NATO in. That's where the crisis started, and the war started in 2014. But the changes in the world started earlier, and they started on a huge scale. This is what we call the creation of a multipolar world. And we just assume that it's happening. And we are contributing, and we are trying to contribute in such a way that it does not lead to destruction, but on the contrary, that everything is quietly building up in a new growing format. You say we need to be more active. How can we be more active? In our opinion, fuss is inappropriate here. We act progressively, step by step. As far as finance is concerned, we have not abandoned the dollar as a universal currency. We have been denied its use. And now 95% of Russia's foreign trade with our partners is conducted in national currencies.
Are you planning to go to the G20 in Rio in November? Secondly, in face of that, do you think that this situation that I described somehow shows the weakness of the BRICS before old organizations like the ICC? And thirdly, with all due respect, do you fear to get arrested in Brazil?
Firstly, the ICC does not have a universal jurisdiction. We have very good relations with Brazil. They're reliable, stable for many years, decades. So, basically, we can sign an intergovernmental agreement and no one will be put in a difficult position. That's it. And that's the end of it. Now about the independence of the ICC. I don't want to stir things up here. The International Criminal Court announced that they're going to take decisions with regard to certain political leaders in the Middle East. But then the United States snapped at them, and that was that. So the respect for an organization that is not universal and is not independent is unfortunately low. You know, we've got a difficult situation. The Ukraine crisis is far from over. Secondly, and most importantly, we realize that G20 is a useful forum if it is not politicized. But we understand what is happening around Russia. And I have a great friendship with President Lula. So, will I go there on purpose to disrupt the normal work of this forum? We understand perfectly well, and I understand what that would lead to. So we'll find another person to represent our country.
Mr. Putin, you mentioned the Ukraine crisis. On the eve of our meeting, speaking at the EU summit in Brussels, Zelensky said that the only alternative to Ukraine joining NATO would be for Ukraine to obtain nuclear weapons. And German outlet, Bild, has published an interview with an anonymous Ukrainian technician who said that Ukraine only needs a few weeks to build its own nuclear weapons to strike Russian forces. What does that even mean?
That's yet another provocation. I can say right away, Russia will not allow this under any circumstances. It is not difficult to create nuclear weapons in the modern world. It is clear how to do it. This is a dangerous provocation, because it will, of course, any step in this direction will be met with a corresponding reaction. A nuclear weapon is hard to hide. It is impossible to conceal one. It's not like a needle in a haystack. And we are able to trace any movements in this direction.
Could Russia take part in peace talks if they were held in a friendly country such as Saudi Arabia?
You just said about friendly relations between Russia and Saudi Arabia. That's right, we consider Saudi Arabia to be a friendly country to us. I have very good relations with the king, friendly relations, personal relations with the crown prince. And I know, I'm just sure that everything that Saudi Arabia is doing in this direction, it's doing sincerely. I don't have any doubts here. And therefore, if such events are organized in Saudi Arabia, the venue itself is quite comfortable for us. That is not the question. The question is what to discuss. As you know, we had long negotiations in Turkey, in Istanbul, and the result of these negotiations was a document that was signed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He is available, has this document. And the extract from it, I repeat again, signed by the head of the negotiating delegation. But if Ukraine put its signature there, it means that everything suited it. It was possible to talk about some details, to finalize it. But to throw it into the rubbish bin, this document seems to me to be completely incorrect. Any document can be thrown into the rubbish bin in this way. That is why we are ready to engage in dialogue on a peaceful end to the conflict, but only on the basis of the document that has been prepared during extensive negotiations over several months and initialed by the Ukrainian side. We are ready to continue working on this basis. There is an initiative by China and Brazil, which are very balanced and objective in their approach to the issues of regulation. And a relevant group has been set up in New York. We will look at it very carefully, with respect. And we understand that all our friends, including the BRICS members, they are determined to end this conflict as quickly and peacefully as possible, because we realize that this is, of course, an irritant in international affairs, in European affairs, in the economy, and so on. We, more than anyone else, are interested in ending it as quickly as possible, and of course by peaceful means. I repeat again, we are ready to return to negotiations, but we were not the ones who interrupted them. I would like to remind you, it was the Ukrainian side that said that it would not negotiate with Russia any further. The Ukrainian president issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us. The decree is still in force. Let's start by cancelling at least this decree. Well, it's ridiculous to even say that. Everyone is calling on us to negotiate, but the fact that the Ukrainian side has forbidden itself to negotiate, does no one pay attention to that? It's ridiculous. But the most important thing is the base. The base is a draft document.
You have a deep understanding of military strategy. How do you feel about the Russian army's performance? Maybe surprise or disappointment? And how can you determine when you will achieve victory in Ukraine?
You know, it is a very difficult thing to determine any deadlines, and it is counterproductive in general. Just now they were talking about the possibility of peace talks. We are in favor. And I said how it could be realized. And if this is a completely sincere position on the part of the state, please, the sooner the better. Now about the army. The modern way of conducting armed struggle is changing very quickly due to technological progress. And it is already quite difficult to give an absolutely accurate assessment of what will happen today for tomorrow. Moreover, not so long ago, it was said that the modern way of waging armed struggle is a confrontation of technologies. Today, I have heard from our combatants that modern warfare is a war of mathematicians. This is a concrete example because, say, the means of electronic warfare, of antagonism, they work for certain means of defeat. The other side has calculated, realized what it's up against, and is changing the software of its strike weapons. Within a week, 10 weeks, 3 weeks, the other side increases its efforts and changes the software of its electronic suppression weapons. This goes on indefinitely. Well, of course, it's clear absolutely that the Ukrainian army is not capable of doing that. Neither is it able to use precision and long-range means of defeat, because they simply don't have any. It's clear that NATO countries and NATO military specialists are doing all this. You know what the difference is? NATO is fighting us, but with the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine does not spare its soldiers in the interests of third countries. But Ukraine does not use high-tech weapons itself. NATO does. And the Russian army fights itself. And the military creates the products itself and makes the software itself. And there is a huge difference. And this is especially evident recently. I'm recording it, I'm watching it. The Russian army is certainly becoming not just one of the most high-tech, but also the most combat-ready. And when NATO gets tired of fighting us, you can ask them that too. We are ready to continue this fight, and we will win. We do everything ourselves. We fight and make our own equipment. Do you understand? The difference is colossal, really. NATO does not feel sorry for Ukrainians. They are not their soldiers. They serve US interests. And we think about our soldiers, we think about equipment. And when we think about our soldiers, we think about how to ensure peace, including by peaceful means. That's the difference. That's the colossal difference. This is what our soldiers are fighting for. These are our territories. We need a durable, lasting and firm peace, with equal security of this crucial and complex process. This is what we strive for. And you know, when people talked in the past about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia and defeating Russia on the battlefield, gaining a victory for Ukraine, they now know it's not viable, it's unfeasible, and they have changed their mind, so I praise them for that.
Within the BRICS framework, we see that Russia supports the aspirations of various countries that are seeking to join it. We realize that the summit is taking place at a turbulent time, a lot of challenges and threats that we see at the global level today. What is your vision of future cooperation between the BRICS group members and the modalities of enlargement, particularly in the economic cross-section? Of particular interest is the BRICS common single currency, which could contribute to the development of economic cooperation and strengthen national currencies, among others. What are the steps for the long term in this regard?
As for the BRICS single currency, we are not considering this issue at the moment. We have to be very careful. Here, we have to act gradually, not in a hurry. At the moment, we are studying the possibilities of expanding the use of national currencies and creating instruments that would make such work safe. We are now considering the use of electronic instruments. It is necessary to establish relations between central banks and to ensure a reliable exchange of financial information that would be independent of those international instruments for the exchange of financial information that impose certain restrictions for political reasons and violate the principles of the world economy. We will expand the action and work of the pool of currencies and strengthen the BRICS Bank. In order to talk about creating a single currency, we need to have a high degree of integration of economies. It is necessary not only to have a high degree of integration of economies, but also to achieve their comparable quality and volume. The economies should be roughly equivalent in their structure and efficiency. Otherwise, we will face the problems that arose in the European Union when a single currency was introduced for those countries whose economic levels were not equal. So this is a distant prospect, but theoretically, maybe we can talk about it in the future. Now, as far as expansion is concerned, now one wave of BRICS expansion has passed. New members of the organization need to adapt to working together. This also requires some time. despite the fact that we have been working with each other and interacting for a long time, we still need to work within the framework of a single organization. Interest in the BRICS work and participation in its work is growing. 30 countries have expressed their desire to work with BRICS. Therefore, together with our colleagues, we are working out a category of BRICS partner countries. And the first step will be to build this work. For Russia, these are, first of all, the CIS countries and the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. But we will also be happy to invite and work with these countries from other regions. Here, of course, we need a consensus. And we will act carefully in this respect, guided by two principles. The first is multilateralism, and the second is the effectiveness of the organization's work. That is, by increasing the number of members of the organization, we must not minimize the effectiveness of the structure itself.
Поэтому руководствуясь этими соображениями, будем действовать.